What's up, y'all? This is Hammer here again, back with another video. And today, I'm going to be talking about something I've been noticing. And what I've been noticing in recent time is this sort of growing exposure, or I guess growing number of, women who are on the right being exposed as essentially feminists, right? Now, let me start by saying this, okay? Something I have said before is that feminism is not a cause, it's an effect. Meaning that feminism is an effect of the post industrial environment. Okay? Because once again, the only way, women can have this sort of independence, be able to be on their own, is because they live in an economic system that essentially subsidizes them. So under capitalism, because under capitalism, it is to the system's benefit, to have women out there, be economically empowered because they want, more labor, more consumers, more tax base. The system essentially facilitates their independence. But if you look at the agrarian age, for example, because it was not to the economic system's advantage for women to be independent, it was not facilitated. The environment did not allow it. So it's the post-industrial, it's a capitalist environment that facilitates women's independence and facilitates feminism. This is the reason why, for example, when societies go from agrarian to industrial, you see the feminism rise. Same thing in Africa. When Africa went out, is so industrialized, and you saw the rise of feminism there too as well too. So what does that mean? That means that when you are a society that is industrialized or post-industrial, you can't run from feminism, right? Because once you essentially go from the grid society and once you go into an industrialized, capitalist environment, the environment is going to facilitate women's independence, which will essentially give birth to feminism. So feminism is actually an effect to the sort of societies going through the industrial cycle and the industrial cycle and the capitalist environment that they're then going on to facilitate women's independence. So that means that if you live in the West or if you live in any sort of post society, feminism is going to be a feature because the industrial environment, the post industrial environment is going to keep it in place. And so it is impossible for a woman to be anti-feminist while her living in an industrial environment because the environment facilitates her independence, right? And the environment essentially allows her to not have to be dependent on a man. So she can say whatever she wants about her, whether she's against or not. But the problem is that it's not going to be genuine opposition to feminism because, once again, she always has the ability to hop back to being independent whenever she wants to, right? This is different compared to an agrarian environment that will essentially force you to sort of play a certain gender role. The reason why this matters is because something that I have noticed is this growing number in recent times of women on the right who are essentially being exposed as feminists. But once again, something I've always told guys is that this idea of a conservative woman in a post-industrial society is an oxymoron. Because a woman who lives in an environment where she can gather her own resources by herself, survive on her own, be able to go out here and compete with men. In other words, women who live in an environment where they can survive independent of men cannot really be conservative in this kind of way, right? Because for the most part, their idea of conservatism is always going to be tied to them having the ability to be independent from the man. That's the reality. And so when you look at these conservative women, yeah, it's easy for them to quote unquote be conservative because they live in an environment where they don't actually have to submit to a man. They live in an environment where they can actually survive on their own. But the moment in which, real traditional conservatism comes to play, which is, hey, you're going to have to submit to your husband, depend on him fully, and depend on your survival, all of a sudden now they're not concerned anymore. Right? Really, what conservative women are in an industrial environment is that what they really want is they still want the privileges and the freedom and the power that, the post-industrial environment gives them. They just don't want to have the responsibilities of men. That's what conservative people are. And I love how you're starting to see more and more of them being exposed, right? That no, it's not that you oppose feminism, you just don't want to have the same response as men. But you fundamentally believe in the same privileges, right? And you have no problem with that, right? But the moment in which the conversation is about, okay, well, if you don't want to have the same responsibility, you shouldn't have the same power and privileges, all of a sudden you get exposed. What made me do this video is that recently there was a conversation that was sparked on Twitter, specifically by Sydney Watson, the girl you're seeing on the image, right? Sydney Watson is a supposed conservative female who's been LARPing for a very long time about how, oh, I'm against feminists, all that stuff, right? But something that I have actually noticed is that you've had two contingencies that have emerged, right? You have the traditional, quote unquote, what I call fake conservative women, like Sydney Watson, and then you have others like Kara Densky, for example, and who was it anyway? Kara Densky and other women who, grew up on the left. They were feminists, but they only decided to go on the right because feminism essentially on the left is reaching its final conclusion. Now, of course, feminism runs society, but the point is that when you look at the different political parties, right? Although we live in a society where feminism is affects right? One party tends to be much more open about, much more in support of it, and one party tends to, in rhetoric, right? In rhetoric, tends to be against it, right? Because Republicans, they'll do all the rhetoric against feminism, but like I said before, many of them will be the first to put harder child support law, which is crazy because I'm gonna give an example. A lot of those GOP Republicans are now pushing for prenatal child support, which is crazy. How are you saying that you're trying to prevent single motherhood, but you're facilitating child support? This is weird. But although we live in a society that is not, in a post-industrial society that essentially now has to be content with feminism, one party, right, essentially has a rhetoric that is pro-feminism, and another party, the right wing, has a rhetoric that's anti-feminism, even though both sides are essentially subject to the environment. But nevertheless, what you have essentially seen is that a lot of women who were traditional feminists on the left, right, have sort of moving to the right because they've seen how growing number of the left is now pushing for trans. They're not pushing for women. Hey, women should not be held to the same standard. Women should be able to pay for the bills too. They should be providers too. You see what's happening in Denmark, where now they're talking about women should be conscripted too. So on the left, the rhetoric is that they're seeing more and more how feminism on the left is saying, hey, you guys have the same privilege and power. Now it's time for her to have the same responsibility and burden performance. And I personally believe that the whole transgender thing and the whole replacing sex to gender identity is a part of that. Because what's like, if we're saying that a guy can essentially get into a dress and go into a female sports and compete with women, what are we actually saying? We're saying that, okay, we believe in equality between the sexes to the point that we believe that men and women are interchangeable. And we believe that women essentially, should be able to compete on the same level. In other words, we're going to hold women to the same burden of performance, right, and to the same standards as men. The same way a dude would have to compete with a trans, so is a female. And when you have them pushing to sort of eradicate sex or gender identity, well, what are you saying, right? We now view men and women as completely interchangeable, meaning that women, yes, you will have the same privileges, but you will also have the same standards, the same responsibility, and the same burden of performance. And so I believe the whole trans thing is just a part of that trend. I believe the growing number of folks advocating for, hey, women should be okay with taking on male gender roles, or women should be okay with men not having to be forcefully providers. Women should be okay with being grafted into the military. Right? You're seeing more and more of that now. In other words, more and more of women essentially being held to the same standard, essentially being held to the same performance. But here's the issue. That's not what the women wanted. What they wanted was feminism, where they had the privileges and the responsibility. So now that on the left, feminism is now actually going towards true equality, which is power and responsibility. Now, a lot of this disgruntled feminists, specifically because of the whole trans thing, are going on the right. But the problem is that although the right, just like the left, is also influenced by feminism, right? The right at least has a rhetoric that is anti-feminist. Right? They have a rhetoric that is female power, right? And so when they come on the right and they talk about, trans, we're like, look, first of all, everything you're complaining about that's happening with feminism right now, especially when it goes to the left, when it comes to trans, when it comes to women being, Denmark, for example, women being pushed to the draft, when it comes to women being told that they're going to have to be treated like a man, women being told to stand on their own two square, women being held to the same center. All of that is really just true feminism. It's true. Like, what you're really complaining is that feminism is actually treating y'all equally. And what you really want the right wing to do is you want us to essentially do what you guys have been able to get away with, right? You want us to hold men to responsibilities while giving you privileges. That's all this is. And when Sydney Watson essentially made that post on Twitter talking about how, as a woman right now, it feels bad because the left and the right are misogynist, and hey, wait a minute, she got flipped. What are you talking about? What essentially is happening is this. You live in a society that is post-industrial, and that has led to essentially feminism, to the birth of feminism and feminism going on to society. And now you have two parties that in rhetoric, not in action, in rhetoric, because don't get into when it comes to Republican Party, they're subject to the environment the same way Democrats are, right? But in rhetoric, one party tends to be more pro-feminist, and in rhetoric, the Republican party tends to be anti-feminist, right? But of course, in practice, they're both subject to the environment. What you're really complaining about is that on the left, right, they're actually pushing for real gender equality. They're actually saying, hey, you want the same privileges, so now you're going to have the same birth performance, right? Yeah, you're going to have to compete with this man. You're going to have to compete with this guy in a dress. You're going to have to maybe get a guy who makes less money. You're going to have to be the breadwinner. Yes, you're going to have you're no longer going to be able to use the fact you are a female to say, I should have more rights to a child. Yes, you may be called up to the draft. Now that women are essentially being told, hey, the privileges you were given to you, and now the responsibility and the burden of performance and the standards have to be given to you the same way. Now y'all will want to cry about how quote unquote women are being attacked. No, women are simply being held to the same standards. So the irony is that the growing number of women on the left who are complaining about the trans, complaining about the direction of feminism, complaining about the draft, complaining about gender roles, what they're really complaining about is the fact that on the left specifically, feminism is now actually going towards real equality, saying you're going to have to have the same burden of performance as men. And so what they're doing is they're running down to the right, and say, well, I'm anti-feminist. And of course, the right is saying, no, you're not. What you're really against is true feminism, right? What you really want is you want a situation where you have the privileges, the power to prove, without the responsibility. Because once again, when we say, okay, if you don't want the responsibility of men, you shouldn't have to have the power and the rights, all of a sudden y'all want them off, that's what I'm thinking. Wait a minute. You can't have it both ways. If you want the power of men, you must have the responsibilities and the burden of performance. If you don't want the responsibility and burden of performance of men, you should not have the power. And so what this has essentially done is it has created a situation in which, in my point of view, where specifically in the West, specifically in countries that are further along the industrial cycle, you now have a split, right, in which feminism is now going towards its final conclusion, which is true gender equality, in which men and women become interchangeable. And specifically, women essentially are held to the same standards and burden of performance of men. And we already know that women cannot take it. So the moment in which women are held to the same standards and performance of men, they fail, right? And then on the other side, right, you have folks who are saying, well, if women cannot handle the same standards of performance, they shouldn't have the same power and rights, and all that shit should roll back. That's essentially what you're seeing, right? Rhetoric-wise. Now, keep in mind, all this is happening under the situation in which all this is happening within an industrial society that is still influenced by feminism. But in terms of the ideologies, you're seeing this, right? There's only two ways forward. Either we go down the path of feminism, and feminism go towards its final conclusion where, yes, you have the rights of men, but also the burden of performance and responsibilities. Or if you don't want to have the responsibilities and the performance of men, then you don't have the rights and power. That's what's happening, and women like women like Sydney Watson, the feminists, and the fake conservative women who talk about how they're conservative, but really, when they say they're conservative, what they mean is they only believe in men having responsibilities. But when it comes to power, they're very much the same. Conservatism to many women now just means I just want to have the power of men without the responsibility. Right? But now that we are essentially in a situation in which women essentially have to make a choice, and neither choice is really favorable to them, now she wants on to cry. But here's the reality is this, and I'm going to keep it with you. The future is not looking good for y'all. Because I'm going to give an example. Recently, there was an article that came out talking about how Hispanic and black women who essentially never get married and never have children, I think, has some of the lowest wealth in the country. Of course, I was like, I'm not surprised, because once again, we already know that in society, women do not have the burden of men. Women cannot build and produce the way men can. The only way they can have their independence is if it's being subsidized, right? Now, in a capitalist environment, right, capitalism is what facilitates their independence. Right? But even with that, right, their ability to garner resources, outside of just the capitalist environment is still traditionally through what? Through the men and the state. So I'm going to give an example. Even before, capitalism came along and essentially facilitated independence, right, women historically could not produce resources or could not build the way men can. So the way they were able to gather, or I guess tap into resources, was through two things: through the men and through the state. They got the resource to the men, and they got resource to the state through the children. So they were either, okay, if I'm a female, I can essentially get the resource to the man, whether it's through marriage or get it through the state. Right? Or I can use my children to get the risk from a man or through the state. So a woman who neither is married or has or doesn't have children, she literally no longer has the means to get resource from a man or the state, because if the dude is not dealing with you, he has no reason to have your resources. And when it comes to the state, if you're not offering to say any kids, it has no reason to give you resources. So you're essentially by yourself. And although now historically women would not be able to survive by their own, right? Or historically women would not be able to survive on their own. But even though you now live in an environment where you can survive on your own, right? You still have to meet the burden of performance, and you're not able to do that. That's the reason why, in my opinion, I feel like it's really not. It's real. The future's looking bleak for them right now, because think about what they're facing, right? They're essentially facing a situation in which societies that are post-industrial are now having to make a choice, right? If we're going to keep going to the path of feminism and women having the same rights as men, you're eventually going to have to hold women to the same burden of performance and the same standards as men. Right? And in my opinion, the whole trans thing and women having to compete with men, the erasure of sex, women essentially being drafted into the military, women being told, hey, you have to go out here and figure it out. Hey, if you can survive, so you're like, all of that, in my opinion, tells me that, that's where we're going. Like, we're essentially going down the path of, okay, fine, you can keep your rights and privileges as men, but you're going to be held to the same burden of performance and the same standards. And what we're seeing is that because women cannot take on the same responsibilities, the same burden of performance, the same standards as men, they're going to fail. And when they fail, no one's going to care because you're going to be treated like men. So that's what society is going. The only way that it doesn't go down that path is if society decides to say, you know what, we're going to roll the shit back and essentially, okay, you don't have to be held to the same burden of performance and the same standards as men, but you also won't have the same power and rights. So those are the two paths, right? Right now, we are going down in the West, right? Especially the industrialized world. The industrialized world essentially is going on the path of, okay, you will have the rights of men, but you will also have the same responsibility. You will also have the same, right? That's the path we're going down. And women are crying because, once again, despite all the rhetoric about gender equality, the thing that women don't actually want or fear the most is true gender equality, because true gender equality means they would have to perform like men. And because they can't do that, and the moment in which they are forced to do that, they will fail. And when they fail, no one cares. So the only way, gender equality benefits women is if they have the rights of men without the responsibility. But we'll say, no, that's not going to happen. The way it's going is not. Eventually, you're going to have the same responsibility as men. And that's the reason why they're crying right now. The only other way is if, okay, you don't have the same responsibilities and the same burden from the same standards, but you don't have the same power and rights. And so I feel like, what's happening right now is quite funny, because it just feels like, regardless of where we go, the average female, especially it's not looking good, right? Because think about it. If we keep going down the path we're going down, eventually it doesn't end well for them, because eventually they're going to have to be held to the same burden of performance and the same standards as men. And the moment in which that happens, they will fail, and they will be allowed to fail like men, and no one will care, which of course hurts women. But if they don't want to do that, if they don't want to be held to the same standards as men, the only way for them to avoid that is that we would have to go down the other path, which is, okay, you don't want to be held to the same standards, you don't want to have the same burden of performance, great. You're also going to have to essentially give up the rights and power, right? And of course, women would very much cry about and complain about. So the reality is, there's only two paths left. Either women have the same rights as men and the same power, as well as the same burden of performance and the same standards as men, or they have neither. So if you want to have the rights, if you want to have the power, you're also going to have to accept the burden of performance, and you're also going to have to accept the same standards as men. If you don't want that, then then you are going to have to both give up the power and the responsibility. Those are the two paths left. And as for me, I personally believe that, society-wise, we're going down the path of, okay, you can keep your the same rights and powers as men, but you will have the same responsibility. You will have the same standards. You will have the same burden of performance. And if you can't meet that, so be it. And if you fail at being able to meet that, no one will care. If you're not able to perform like men, if you're not able to handle the same standards as men, if you can't take on the same burden of performance and the same standards as men, and you fail, no one's going to care. And you're going to be allowed to fall to the cracks like men. Which will mean that the majority of women are, of course, naturally are not going to be able to meet the same burden of performance as men. They're not going to be able to meet the standards, and the majority of them will fail, and society will essentially let them fail. No one will care. And of course, they're going to be crying about, oh my God, they hate women. No. We're holding you to this. No, you are being treated like men. And if you can't handle it, so be it. You're being held to the same standards. And if you can't handle the standards, so be it. No one's going to care. That's, in my opinion, that's what this trans thing is showing, right? Look, you got to compete with this guy in a dress. If you can't do it, so be it. Move out of the way. In other words, what they're really complaining about is true gender equality, when they're actually treated the same as men, where, hey, you either perform or you don't. If you don't perform, move out of the way, and no one's going to care. That's why I think is the side is going. The only other way is that we would have to go back to rigid patriarchy, in which they don't have the power and they don't have the power and the rights, and they don't have the responsibility. So here's what it is. Right, so when I see Sydney Watson, all these women, there's this fake, conservative women crying about how both the left and the right. I said, no, what you have is that the left essentially is saying, hey, let's essentially go towards the final destination of feminism, which is true gender equality, in which women have the same responsibilities, the same burden of performance, and the same status as women. And because you guys don't want that, y'all essentially are running to the right, and we're saying, look, thank you for coming to the right, but over here, there will be no rights and privileges, and there won't be no responsibilities. So that's it. Those are the choices you have. If you want to have the same rights and power as men, you must accept the same burden of performance and the same standards. And you must also accept the fact that if you can't meet the same burden of performance and standards as men, then society will let you fail. If you don't want to deal with that, then you're gonna have to essentially give up the rights, give the power. You're essentially gonna have to give up rights and power if you don't want to have the same responsibility as men. Those are only two paths, right? And all these women who are crying online, trying to have it both ways, look, you're not going to have it both ways. It is what it is. But before I go, it's so funny how not only is it that they're in a situation in which they can no longer have it both ways, like they're going to have to make a choice. Either we have true gender equality or we don't. But of course, true gender equality doesn't help women, and of course, the removal of gender equality means they would have to give up power. They're essentially fucked either way. But even with all that being said, it gets even worse because once again, guess what's coming next, ladies? We have the artificial womb. We haven't even gotten to that point yet. So not only are y'all facing a situation in which you guys could potentially face real gender equality in which society will let you fail, but you will essentially also enter a situation in which men and the state will no longer need you to bear children. And I don't think women understand how a lot of the social capital in society is based on the fact that the men and the state need you to have kids. The moment that's no longer the case, you become indifferent. Like, the society becomes indifferent to you. And trust me, ladies, you don't want it. Like, the only thing worse than death is indifference, because that means nobody literally cares. They don't care, right? And so it just, in my point of view, it just, I just feel like, look, the future for women is looking kind of bleak right now. Because, they've put themselves in the back of a wall where they're either going to have to accept full gender equality or none. If they decide for full gender equality, that's not going to benefit them because they're going to have to be held to the same burden of performance and the same standards as men. And because they cannot meet the same burden of performance and the same standards of men, they're going to fail. Society will let them fail and no one will care. So full gender equality is not going to benefit them. And of course, if we go on the path of essentially not having gender equality, then they're going to have to give up power and accept submitting to the male, accept, being second to the husband. They're going to have to essentially submit to men. They're going to have to accept that gender role, which a lot of them don't want to do. So either way, that's the path they have left now. Either you go down full gender equality where you are allowed to fail as a woman, or you go down rigid patriarchy where you have no power and you submit to men. Those are the two paths we have left. And either way path you go, either path you go is now going to change the fact that the artificial womb is going to get here, and that alone will essentially make you insignificant in society, where neither the men nor the state will need you for reproduction. And that doesn't even include the artificial wife. Right. So that's just my point of view. And, y'all let me in the chat what you guys say. It's funny how I'm seeing all of these, there's this sort of convergence between conservative women and quote unquote disgruntled feminists coming together saying, oh my God, the left and the right hates. No. It's not the left and the right hate women. The left and the right essentially are taking two different ideological positions. They say, hey, we live in an industrial society. The society is influenced by feminism, and now we're going to have to make a choice. Do we go down this path of full gender equality, or do we roll back towards rigid patriarchy? That's the path you have. And y'all can have it both ways. But the problem is that because both paths don't benefit, because the reality is this, what they really wanted is they wanted to have the power of men without the responsibility. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to make a choice, right? That's what the left and right is like. There's going to have the choice. If you want to have the same power as men, you're going to have the same responsibility, the same burden of performance, and the same standards. And that also means that you will be allowed to fail, and no one's it's going to care if you fail. But if you don't want to have to deal with being treated like men, then you're going to have to essentially give up power, and you're going to have to quote unquote submit to men as a group entirely. Because if you don't want to have the responsibility, then you cannot have the power. Those are the two paths. And the fact that you guys are interpreting this as the society here, no. What's happening is that when industrial society, feminism essentially is when industrialized post-industrial society, when a capitalist post-industrial society that is influenced by feminism, and now we only have two paths left. That's it when it comes to women. And because both paths don't benefit you, y'all want to cry. No, it is what it is. But this sort of game that y'all been playing, where you guys can sort of pick and choose when you want to be equal, no, that's not gonna work anymore. Either we have full equality across the board, or we don't. It is what it is. And it's just so funny how now that the feminists, on the left and the conservative on the right are sort of uniting together on Twitter, saying, yeah, the left and the right hate. Shut the fuck up, okay? You guys are both uniting together because both of you guys really want to have the power without the responsibility. And society saying, no, you're going to have to make a choice. And the fact that either choice doesn't benefit women doesn't matter to us. And of course, that's not even including the artificial woman and the artificial wife. But yeah, with all that being said, I just, I'm going to keep real with you, man. It's just like the future is not looking good for women right now. It's not looking good. Not looking good. But anyway, y'all tell me what you guys think in the chat. And, if y'all agree or disagree. But with that being said, like, share, and subscribe. Hammer out.